In July, 71-year-old Lee Coldrake walked out of the Brisbane Magistrates Court, having escaped a jail term.
Do you protest again?
Of course, I will protest again. My passion for dealing with this issue, which we're handing on to our children and grandchildren, it won't go away.
Ms Coldrake was whisked away from the media for fear of saying anything that might harm her 13 co-accused who are awaiting sentencing. They've now been through the courts and she's free to talk.
I received a punishment of a $5,000 fine. The other 13 members were heard on Friday and they all received a good behaviour bond, no criminal conviction.
This is the scene of their crime. In late 2022, then Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk got to her feet during question time to answer a Dorothy Dixer from her backbench.
Other members of my team have been out and about across Queensland talking about our energy and jobs plan, Mr. Speaker.
We can't show you what happened 30 seconds later by order of the Queensland Speaker, although the sound of the protesters shouting "Stop Coal" and the reaction of the Speaker is available on the official parliamentary website.
We had very lightweight banners, which we took into Parliament House, and we unfurled those over the visitors' railing in the visitors' area and chanted to "Stop Coal, Stop Gas." The whole protest lasted about 3 minutes and it was entirely peaceful and we all left when we were asked to.
The 14 climate activists involved in the Parliament House protest have been campaigning for climate action for a long time.
Worried about the climate crisis? You worried about your kids' future?
Lee Coldrake, a retired anaesthetist and wife of Peter Coldrake, who conducted a 2022 review into the Queensland Government's culture, hoped the protest would help bring attention to the climate crisis.
This action came really because we all were at the end of our tether trying to get through to politicians just the seriousness and the urgency with which we need to approach climate change.
But the group didn't reckon on the response from the parliamentarians. The Speaker and Premier spoke about the incident the following day.
The protesters attempted to shout down democracy by being the loudest voice in the chamber and disrupting the Assembly's process.
It is not a laughing matter, Mr. Speaker, because some members approached me afterwards feeling very unsafe in their workplace.
Retired Queensland epidemiologist John Sheridan is one of those protesters who allegedly made Queensland politicians feel unsafe. He and others have continued to hold regular protests outside government offices. John Sheridan says he's scared by the lack of government action on climate change.
It's been so slow and nothing's really happened, and the situation's getting worse and worse and worse.
The protesters were charged under a 19th century law of disturbing the legislature, which carries a possible 3-year jail term.
This is a really unusual application of the law. It's rarely, if ever, been used against protesters, and now we're seeing it in relation to a climate protest.
So it was a little bit of a shock when 24 hours later we were all visited by members of the CIB.
The matter was referred to police by the Queensland Speaker, who declined to be interviewed but has maintained he was acting independently of government and described the incident as serious and deserving of action. The threat of jail hit some hard.
3 years in prison for that, for a 3-minute protest. I may not be able to work with a criminal conviction, and if that makes me unsuitable to work with children, what sort of world are we living in?
Environmental lawyer Elaine Johnson says the Queensland prosecution is part of a national trend of harsher penalties and more serious charges being laid against climate protesters.
Environmental protesters are facing dramatically tougher penalties in Australia, and that means that police are laying charges that haven't traditionally been used in response to peaceful protest.
The crackdown coincided with the rise of the international protest group Extinction Rebellion, which shut down London streets for days.
If protesters want to put our way of life at risk, they should have the book thrown at them.
Some of the harshest anti-protest laws were introduced by the New South Wales government, elements of which were repealed late last year after being challenged in the Supreme Court.
The High Court of Australia has said that a free and fair democracy requires peaceful protest and the right to protest. The two cannot be separated.
As to the substance of the complaints by the Queensland climate protesters, the minister responsible declined to be interviewed, but said the government had legislated a renewable energy target of 50% by the end of the decade, and it planned to have no regular reliance on coal by 2035. With a state election looming, the climate activists believe both sides aren't ambitious enough.
Really, we should be having bipartisan support for this. Our politicians have a duty of care for future generations, and they're abrogating that responsibility at the moment.